Howdy folks, welcome back to Boonedockery. Today I'm in the woods and we're going to talk about fire. I'm going to talk about my fire kit. I'm going to talk about foraging natural materials for fire. I'm going to talk about all kinds of things about fire. Hope you enjoy it because I'm enjoying my time in the woods. Let's go ahead and get started. You know, I've kind of been thinking about it, and I think it's impossible to think about bushcrafting, survival skills, camping in general for that matter, without thinking of the top 10 items that make those things what they are. And amongst those top 10 things would have to be fire. Why do we have this affinity with fire? I mean, really? I mean, it's not like we need a campfire. And we have portable stoves. We can cook our food on that. We can boil water to make coffee, reconstitute meals, to sanitize water for that matter. We have all kinds of illumination devices. I mean, we have headlamps, we have flashlights, we have lanterns. For that matter, we even have chemical glow sticks. We have, insect repellent, bear spray. We can hang our food up in a tree to deter pests. We don't necessarily need the smoke to deter them. And as far as warmth goes, I mean, we have base layers, we have mid layers, we have outer layers, we have quilts and sleeping bags. We have all kinds of things to keep us warm. It's not just a utilitarian thing. I mean, sitting around a fire is much, much deeper than that. But you know, when it gets down to it, there's just something primeval about fire. There's something deep within us that connects to that fire ring and those flames. There's a comfort associated with gathering around that fire that's unlike any other. If you really, really want to get deep into it and get way out there, perhaps It's our genetic memory connecting back to our ancestors when they sat around the fire. When they cooked their food at the end of the day, you know, the success of the day's hunt, talking about the hunt, everyone get around the fire, eating and partaking of it and laughing and just relishing the company they're having there. And when their belly's full, they sit back and someone stands up and starts to tell a story. They tell a story of their ancestors and things that they did, hunts that they were successful on. That was the beginning of oral history. And then, when the stories were over, their bellies were full, their eyes grew heavy, and they laid down beside that fire, and they slept in the warmth of those embers. The fire is the heart of any camp. It doesn't matter if it's in a twig stove or a tent stove or in a fire ring. You know, the skills necessary and the techniques of making fire are probably as varied as the people that make fire. If you're new to camping and bushcrafting, the techniques and methods of making a fire appear endless. You could definitely become overwhelmed. You don't want to be left in the cold when it comes to making fire. When you're exploring all the multiple possibilities of making fire, the most important things to consider are, can I do it competently? Do I have everything I need? Will I have enough of what I need? Will the techniques and materials that I learn to use work year-round? Will they work in any weather condition? If something happens and I can't be successful with the technique I learned, do I have a backup method? Will I have the fuel I need and the amount I need for the duration I need? Am I prepared to be without a fire if I can't make one? The internet is absolutely full of information. This video is going to be part of that information. What you need to do is you can look at other people's kits and you can experiment with those to see if they're going to work for you. As you're going through these kits, pick and choose. The things that you like, the things that work well for you, keep them. If some survival expert tells you, well, you gotta have this, you gotta have that, you gotta have the other thing, blah, 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 blah. If they do not work for you, get rid of them. Once you've figured out the things that you need for your fire kit that works best for you, the next thing you need to do is to consider, what am I going to carry this in? In order to determine what type of container that you're going to carry it in, what size you're going to carry it in, it's going to rely on a lot of factors. First of all, I would recommend something that's going to be waterproof. It can be as simple as a Ziploc bag. As a matter of fact, I should probably have stock in Ziploc because I use Ziploc bags all the time for my bushcrafting, camping stuff. They work great. They're inexpensive. They're easy to acquire. They come in multiple sizes. And if one wears out, oh well, I replace it. If they tear or I lose it, no big deal. They're cheap. I buy them by the box. No problem. So waterproof is the first thing you need to consider when you're considering what type of container you're going to put your kit in. The other thing you need to consider is, how long am I going to go out? If I'm going to go out for an overnighter, my kit container could be very small. It could be as simple as a lighter and some wet fuel or a Nesbit tab, some type of commercially made fire starter. That can be a fire kit. The more days you go out, the more materials you're going to be using from your fire kit. You always want to make sure you have enough for the fires that you plan on making, and also to have a little bit extra just in case you need to make a fire. Once you've thought about all these considerations and you've picked a container that's going to work well for you, then it's time to take it out and put it to work. I'm going to show you my fire kit. My kit is a blend of modern materials and primitive fire making materials. Keep it all in this red bag I keep in my backpack. However, I also carry many other fire making materials on my person or in other locations on my pack. The reason for this is if I am in a situation where I'm away from my pack and I have a necessity to make fire, I will always have the fire making materials available to me if I need them. I like the old saying, to have two is to have one, and to have one is to have none. Because the worst thing in the world is to realize that you've forgotten your fire kit, or you lose it, something happens to it, and you're not able to use it. If this was the only thing I had, and I needed to make fire, and this was not available to me, I'd be in a world of hurt if I really needed to make a fire. I'm just going to do a breakdown of what I have in my kit. My kit is in a little ditty bag. I keep the actual kit in a large Ziploc to keep it dry, and I put it in this cloth pouch to keep it quiet. The reason being is I have tins in here, 10 containers. There's one, there's two, and I also have a Ziploc baggie of homemade fire starters that's made out of Vaseline and candle wax with 100% cotton facial wipes. One of my tins I use exclusively for making char in this bag, and I always have Ziploc bags to put my char in when it's cool, so that way they stay dry. In this bag I have charred punk wood, and in this bag I have char cloth. If I need to use my char tin to make char, then I have a means to keep these dry and to keep them from blowing away when I'm using this. My other tin has a piece of burlap on the inside that does two things. I can char my burlap to make char cloth. It's a natural material. And inside this I have my steel. I have my flint, so I can spark my char cloth or my charred punk wood. I always carry at least 2 hanks of jute and 2 hanks of sisal. This is sisal rope cut in little sections. They're both natural materials. They both work really, really well if you cannot find the natural materials that you need to start your fire. I also have a lot of little shavings, little twigs that I made out of some fat wood. I can weave these through my bird nest when I make my fire, and they'll ignite that way. But when I break them in these really thin slivers, they will catch fire much easier than something thicker. I also have a pocket bellows, telescoping, to ensure that if I have embers, that I can keep those embers going and turn those into flame. The last thing I have in this kit is my burning lens. If I have this, 9 times out of 10 I can get a fire going if I have sun without the need of any other ignition source. Other items I carry, either at different locations in my pack or on my person, is a lighter. The one thing I want to caution everyone about as far as lighters go, a lot of people will get a lighter, they'll throw it in their fire kit. If your fire kit sits around for any period of time or it's exposed to moisture, the pyrite flint that's inside your lighter will deteriorate. And when you go to flick your bic, all that you're going to get is some powder and dust that's going to come out of it. It will not work. So make certain that if you do use something like this in your fire kit, that you change it regularly and do all that you can to prevent it from being exposed to any moisture. I always carry storm matches. Storm matches are absolutely fantastic. For the longest time, I thought they were just silly, but when it comes to lighting, especially solid fuel tabs and high winds, those will definitely do the job, whereas something like a lighter will not be able to do it. I have a ferromecium rod in the form of a Strike Force. Well, that's what they used to call them anyway. But it's self-contained, and the nice thing about this one is that it has a container built right into the handle for fire starters. Those are the things that I carry with me every time I go out. I will always have these with me, and this is my primary and secondary fire making materials. Let's take a look at some of the things we harvested today. We have grapevine bark, which lights pretty well. You crumple it up, you massage it up, and it breaks into its fibers. Makes it much easier to light that way. We also have pine needles, dried pine needles. You always want to get the stuff that's up off the ground, like a branch is laying over with some pine needles on it, but it's not quite touching the ground. You don't want to get them up off the ground because the ones on the very surface may appear to be dry, but they'll always contain a little bit of moisture. The ones that's up off the ground are going to be the driest, and these will light very, very well. We also harvested, and I wrapped them up in these leaves, some pine resin. And the reason I wrapped them up in these little leaves is because pine resin will get on everything. It's very, very sticky, and it will burn very, very well. It's like almost like rubber cement when it burns. Up there so you can see it. It's just the sap of a pine tree that's crystallized on the exterior. You can also use that as an antiseptic. If you have a wound, you can apply some of that to the wound and it will sterilize it. We have punk wood. When a tree rots, it goes through different stages, and insects help that along. But at one particular stage on hardwood trees is that the wood itself turns into a spongy consistency. And this, with a burning lens, or if you use char cloth and ignite it to where as an ember, if you set an ember on here, it will begin to burn very, very slowly. If you have a burning lens, you can focus it on the punk wood and it will begin to burn as an ember. This will burn for a long time. You can actually carry it from one point to the next, but that is absolutely fantastic when a large portion of that is fully burning as an ember. You can use that in itself to light a fire. I have some resin soaked pine bark. I have a piece of fat wood that I harvested from a dead pine tree, and pine cones. Once you have your fire initially started, throw some pine cones on there and they will burn very fast and very hot. That will give you the ability to put all of your primary and secondary tinder on there and allow that to get good and ignited. The other thing that we had, and you have to be careful with this stuff because it will get everywhere. I always have some type of a paper towel or some type of shamag or bandana or something like that. And I always wrap these up before I put them in my pack. These are cattail heads. Cattail heads burn very, very fast and very, very hot. It's used for many, many things, but fire making is just one of them, and it does an amazing job at it. The most important thing that anyone can do when you're making fire is to make certain you have all of your fire making needs ready at hand. You don't have enough to make a fire, you have more than enough to make your fire. If you want to practice being a minimalist and using the bare minimum materials necessary to make a fire, great, go for it, have fun. You know, it's good to have a challenge once in a while, but don't rely on that. Never rely on that. Have more than enough materials to make your fire. My fire is going to consist of my primary tinder, which I call twiglets, and my secondary tinder and my fuel. This is going to be a very small fire, so I don't need large pieces of firewood. The first thing I'm going to do to prepare my fire is I'm going to lay down a small base of fuel. This will be enough to rest my bird nest and my tinder on, and it will burn down and we'll burn all that into good embers. So I just need a single layer, and I'll have other fuel, larger sticks to put on this once it gets going. I always try to put a larger piece up toward the top, so that way when I put my bird nest down on top of this, I can put my tinder on top of it. It will rest on this, so it's not going to completely drown out the flame. We want to have that flame going so all of our primary and secondary tinder will ignite. The first thing I'm going to do to prep my bird nest is I'm going to separate my sisal rope. And in doing that, I'm going to be able to use the individual fibers to create my fire. I always tie off the ends to keep it from fraying, and I could also use that jute that I tie them off with to fluff up for my bird nest as well. The reason I keep these in rope form is they're less hygroscopic that way. They absorb less moisture that way. And it's very compact. You don't have a lot of loose fibers floating around your fire kit. It breaks down into 3 strands, and each one of those strands is going to unravel into multiple strands, and it looks like this is 5 strands. And with each one of those, I'm going to break those down into individual fibers. This will take a few minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll bring you back when I'm finished. One of the things I wanted to show you about how I layer my bird nest with the sisal is once I put one strand down, which would be one strand is the equivalent of 1/3 of the rope, I lay it in one direction, and then I unravel the fibers from the next one, and we'll lay it across, sort of like lattice work. And what that does is it creates a little bit of a weave to hold the other materials in place without them falling through. The sisal portion of the bird nest is complete. Now I'm going to cut up this hank of jute, and I'm going to fuzz it up, and I'll show you how to do that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these into shorter little sections. And where I had it rolled over, goes through right through the loops. then you're going to untwist the individual strands of the jute. Just unroll them and pull them apart. And once you have them pulled apart, just go ahead and set those on your knee and pull those out, and you'll get those fibers broken up and they'll get nice and fuzzy. And we're going to put that fuzz in the middle of our bird nest. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of feed in some of these slivers of fat wood in through the bird nest. That's going to help hold it together, and also when it lights, the fat wood will ignite. This makes it hold together just a little bit easier. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some of that cattail fuzz inside of it. To help it out, fashion it in there. And now I'm going to put some punk wood in it. This is a piece of charred punk wood. The punk wood I showed you earlier can be put into a tin and charred just like char cloth. When I ignite my char cloth with a spark and create a small ember on that, I put that on here, and this will begin to burn as an ember, but it will burn very hot and a lot larger of an ember, so the likelihood of it igniting all of the materials I have in here for my bird nest is going to be, you know, almost foolproof. And since it is abundant, I can make it every single time I go out. I use a bunch of it. This is a big chunk, and it's going to do the job. I have my flint, I have my steel, and I have a piece of char cloth. Fold the char cloth over so it will catch an ember. It's burning quite nice. I'm going to put that on my piece of punk wood, and so you can see what I'm doing. We'll use my pocket bellows. Throw a couple of these pine cones on. This is a tremendous amount of heat, and that initial amount of heat and the amount of flame is exactly what you need to ignite that primary tinder, and we'll be able to add on the secondary tinder. The pine cone's burning nice, almost burned out already. We did not need to use the pine resin. We did not have the opportunity because of the lack of sun. I was going to start the fire using the punk wood with my burning lens, but we don't have the sunlight available to us now because of the clouds. But we were able to use the cattail fuzz. We were able to use items from my fire making kit. We were able to use the pine needles and the pine cones, and everything that I had in my kit could have done the job on its own. However, when you combine it with the materials that you find naturally, you can expand what you can do with your fire kit. You can extend all those materials that you carry in your fire kit to where they last much, much longer. You know, technically, you need 3 things to make fire. You need fuel, you need an ignition source, and you need oxygen. I had 3 things today that I used to make my fire. I had my fire kit, I had the items that I found in nature to help with that fire kit, and the third thing and most important thing was practice. There's something about a fire. The flames, the smell of the smoke. There really is nothing quite like it. You know, there have been a lot of times where I've camped without a fire. It really wasn't quite the same. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe you got some ideas for your fire kit. Maybe I gave you some ideas of what to look for you're walking through the woods that you can add to your fire kit from nature. If you like today's video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up. If you like what I'm doing and you want to see more of it, go ahead and click subscribe. If you want to stay up to date on everything that's going on, go ahead and hit that notifications bell. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.